Welcome to the Tudor Dixon podcast. I have Gary Shapley with me today. He is a longtime IRS employee and also a word that you probably have heard before. He's a whistleblower. He came forward after watching the Biden DOJ allow Hunter Biden to skate on his serious tax charges. Gary, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Tudor. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I've read some of your op-eds that you've put out there, and I just want to say we appreciate the fact that you were willing to step forward, because you should be protected. You should be able to come out and say, hey, there is a citizen who hasn't done what citizens are meant to do, and it needs to be reviewed. But you've been attacked over this. You've been sued over this. Tell us a little bit about what it's like when the DOJ doesn't have your back like they're supposed to.
Yeah, it's been, I wouldn't change a thing to start everything, start the whole conversation. When someone sees something wrong like this, you got to step forward. And when people say the words choose your battles, every time someone says that, it kind of tears away from the integrity a little bit, right? So this was a battle that I didn't, it wasn't a choice to choose. I just had to go forward. I had to do what I did. And coming forward, and I think that all the things that have happened so far with the trying to let Hunter Biden off with almost no charges, and then the 2 misdemeanor plea deal, and then all the way through a guilty verdict at trial, and then a guilty plea in California, really proved that Joe Ziegler and I were right coming forward. And it's been just horrible the way that the bureaucracy within the federal government has attacked us. They know that they were in the wrong. They know that it wouldn't have been brought to the American people if we hadn't come forward. And the bureaucracy is attempting to protect itself, and that means destroy Joe Ziegler.
Do you think that this was something that Hunter Biden did because he felt that he was protected since his father was vice president of the United States and now president of the United States? Was it a privileged situation where like, I can do whatever I want? Or do you buy into the story of, he had this addiction and he just didn't realize what was happening?
Well, the story about addiction and stuff, it's really difficult to kind of talk about, right? Because people who are addicted to things, I mean, it's really a big deference given to them. But that's the narrative that's given by the White House, by the Biden legal team, right? Like the basis for these charges in California were tax crimes committed after he filed tax returns while he was sober. So, he admitted himself in the book that he was sober. Everyone's admitted that he's sober. They're taking credit that he's been sober, for a few years now. But what the biggest issue was the language and the pardon from President Biden, which just really was completely false. And it was trying to build a narrative to create this impression that Hunter Biden wasn't guilty of these crimes, which he admitted himself he was.
And I think that this goes to the honesty of Joe Biden in a big way. And I think a lot of people are forgiving it now because they go, oh, he's going to be out of office and he's so old. And I think the bigger concern here is he's set a new precedent. And that's something that we have to be overly aware of. When you are a career politician, he's in the Senate for all those years. He had connections in the Senate. He became vice president. But then when he became president, and think about it, when he was vice president, and right after he was vice president, Donald Trump comes in and says, was there anything sketchy that happened in Ukraine? And he gets impeached, but Joe Biden never gets looked at. He skates. And then you guys step forward and people start to say, there's no way to hide this situation with Hunter Biden. He was getting a massive amount of money, wasn't paying his taxes. You got this laptop. This all comes together. And Joe Biden says, I'm not going to pardon him. Now, Joe Biden is a notorious liar. He's lied his entire career. He's like, when you look up lying politician in the dictionary, Joe Biden's picture is there, right? He couldn't even run for president twice because they said he was a plagiarizer and he was a liar, right? We know that this is his history, but there are what people call little white lies, and then there are very dangerous lies. And to me, this is a very dangerous lie because he said he wasn't going to pardon him. My son is so smart. He's only done these great business dealings. I've never been involved in his business dealings. But then he does this 11-year pardon that covers everything. And you have to question whether or not this is going to be a precedent set by future presidents who will have their children make massive amounts of money off of their father or their mother being the president of the United States and being able to wipe all of their sins clean.
Yeah, so sitting here, it doesn't really make me feel overly comfortable to be able to say that the president of the United States lied to people. This is not a matter of perspective, which political ideology you have, whether someone was told the truth, little white lie or whatever. I mean, when you sit there and you're the president of the United States and you tell everyone that you're not going to pardon your son, I knew it wasn't true at the time, but you're not going to pardon your son, and then you go ahead and pardon your son. I mean, it should be pause for every American citizen to just question everything within this bureaucracy that was created under Biden's reign. And going back to Ukraine real quick, right? So, I mean, yeah, President Trump was impeached by the House for asking the Ukrainian officials to investigate Biden and his activities in Ukraine. He was absolutely right in doing so. And he knew that the Department of Justice couldn't investigate that without bias. And we are sitting right here, and we know we had the opportunity to investigate what happened in Ukraine. And we know that DOJ didn't allow us to fully investigate it. If that was known, and President Trump asked Ukraine to investigate, and really he's asking a third party, like, should be unbiased or less biased than DOJ is, to investigate what happened in Ukraine with the Bidens, they likely would have found out what happened because DOJ had a crack at it. They didn't let us do it. So it's really amazing. Maybe DOJ didn't let us investigate it fully because it would have come back and been like, well, oh, so you just impeached President Trump for asking for a thorough investigation of what we just proved was conduct that was inappropriate in Ukraine. So it's quite an interesting dynamic.
Well, I think it's also interesting because it was early on in his presidency, obviously, that this happened, and they all accused him of wanting to investigate his political opponent. And that at that time, I don't think anybody had the contenders that would come out for 2020 come out, and everybody knew that Joe Biden had been pushed aside and told, it's Hillary's turn, it's not your turn, you're not going to run. So there is nobody on the Republican side or on Donald Trump's side that would have said, oh, he's absolutely going to be the nominee 4 years from now. However, for some reason, Democrats seem to know that. And that, to me, I think there's a few things that are uncovered here. They have already chosen. And if you look at what's happened politically, there is not, I mean, Bernie Sanders gets kicked to the side, Joe Biden gets kicked to the side. They kind of choose who they're going to have. And then when Joe Biden was running, everybody else just kind of bowed out gracefully and came up with the story of like, oh, yeah, I've decided I'm going to step out of the race. But it was pretty clear that that was already decided. They already knew they had chosen Joe Biden. But they also, I believe, knew at that time that something had gone on with Joe Biden and they were covering. Now, why is everybody so afraid of an investigation into the family member of a politician? Because if a family member, I think that's where we feel like we have the most vulnerability. And that's why we're always very careful with our politicians and where they are and who they're with. And we have so many rules around disclosure and finding out what their financials are. And you hear all about stocks and all of this all the time because we're trying to make sure that nobody is using their political influence for personal gain. Do you think that there is a way to bring this DOJ back to an unbiased bureaucracy that actually is functioning as an investigative wing of the government?
Yeah, well, I'm very optimistic, right? When hearing with what the Doge is planning to do, talking about the bureaucracy, right? The bureaucracy's biggest enemy is transparency and accountability, right? That's why they don't let some of these career DOJ officials testify in front of Congress, because they're protecting that bureaucracy. So, it's dealing with DOJ and seeing the decisions that they make every day on a case that they had the opportunity to show that they weren't biased and that they could do a thorough investigation of someone that happens to be connected politically, would have been a perfect opportunity for them to prove that they're not biased, or it's not this political bias, it's not the weaponization, it's not lawfare. And they completely failed. They completely failed. Merrick Garland went in front of the American people, the Attorney General of the United States, and he told him that David Weiss had full authority. It was completely false. David Weiss's own testimony in front of the Congress admitted that he had to go through two Biden-appointed U.S. attorneys in D.C. and California. And then if David Weiss had full authority to make all the decisions, why did he need to make him special counsel? Right? These are the building blocks in what actually happened. In my opinion, that DOJ is weaponized against the Republican Party, and if the new administration comes in and really looks at it and dissects it from people who know, people who aren't products of the bureaucracy, right? I think that we have a chance to turning it around, but it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of work.
You said you always believed that he would pardon his son, but were you expecting the wide-ranging pardon of 11 years, sparing him from sentencing in court cases where he's already found guilty? All of this, I mean, it goes back to his taxes, but it covers everything. And it honestly covers the rest of Joe Biden's family too, I believe, because if you can't investigate Hunter, you can't make the connection to the others.
It's not surprising to me, knowing what I know, what happened since January 1st, 2014, in the Biden family. It does not surprise me that he preemptively pardoned him for all of that.
What do you mean when you say knowing what you know?
Well, with the information we brought forward pertaining to Ukraine, Romania, and China, going back to Burisma, when Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, and even in DOJ filings, they even admitted that Hunter Biden was attempting to affect U.S. policy. Yet, in the investigation of FARA, we just weren't allowed to go there. Whenever it got close to Joe, or close to proving some of these things, we got the hand up, and they didn't allow us to take those investigative steps. But it's hard to put all the pieces together as an investigator. We have all this evidence, and it's just a mountain of evidence, right? And we expect to put it out there and not provide conclusions, but just provide the facts. But there's just so much information out there to put the facts together. But to conclude anything other than these governments were paying Hunter Biden for access to administration would be completely false. That's what it was. That's what it was. That's what it was for. And everyone really knows it now if they look at the documents, even DOJ filing.
So you said yourself that it's not something that you go out and you say, I want to go fight this battle. I'm not out there just looking for hills to die on. But in this case, you see something wrong and it's your duty. I mean, this is your job to come out and say, hey, there's something fishy going on. This is not acceptable. It needs to be reviewed. You were viciously attacked. Where does that stand today?
Yeah, I'm still retaliated against by my agency, and the Office of Special Counsel is the federal agency that investigates retaliation, and we have several complaints in with them, and it's taken almost 2 years now for them to not even come up with conclusions yet. The retaliation is affected, right? Like, my whole career has been affected. The way the agency knows what are prohibited personnel practices, which is what has to be proved to prove there's retaliation. They know what they are. They're like decreased evaluation scores, didn't get a promotion, got moved to some, Duluth, Minnesota, where it's nice and warm these times of year. But like, they know what these prohibited personnel practices are, so they're doing everything they can outside of it, right, to try to say that they're not retaliating. I've applied for multiple jobs that I've already attained that level previously, competitively, and I apply for these jobs and they say I'm not eligible, or they don't interview me for them, all because they know that my tenure is coming up. And so I have a tenure of 7 years, so the tenure's coming up, and they know that if they kneel on the football and deny me any promotion potential, then I'm going to be demoted. And they sent out the tenure letter that said either choose to be demoted or resign. It's unbelievable that professional individuals in any capacity would send out a letter to a great employee who's attained leadership levels and and above, they send out a letter that literally says, "Would you like to resign?"
Wow. I mean,
It's beyond pale.
you've said you've even had senior leaders who don't speak to you over this. I mean, what is that? We think of this as like, oh gosh, this is so immature, but it goes so much deeper than that, because this means that, like I said, I just have to lay this out again. If you are the president of the United States and you use your government to silence people, to shut people up when they speak against you, and you have used your son, and I think that you have to say Joe Biden was a willing participant in this scheme of selling access, because his son was getting a massive amount of money. His brother, his grandchildren, everyone in the family was profiting off of this. When you have such control, when one party has such control over the unelected bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., that they can actually go after an employee who is doing the right thing, someone who says, I saw something wrong and I'm going to blow the whistle on it, and try to intimidate you until you leave. What does that say? Can Donald Trump actually root this out and get this out of the system?
Like I said, I'm optimistic, right? Like I'm hoping to be a part of that. Right? Like if we went into the Department of Treasury, DOJ, these places that have a lot of experience, and you need to like be able to know the exact fault lines and where to go and where to use a scalpel to cut them out. These career bureaucrats, and I call them, they're products of the bureaucracy. They're people that would not be where they are if it wasn't for a bureaucracy promoting just yes men and yes women, and people that are willing to just use one voice in a way where they just provide the echo chamber for their leadership. And going to the whistleblower label, we have to protect whistleblowers, all whistleblowers. But the problem is that when a whistleblower comes forward, and I didn't come forward in a partisan manner, like this was just what was in front of me, this is what I was in charge of, and it wasn't right what happened. So I came forward and I knew I was going to be politically attacked. It seems as though the whistleblowers that come forward, that whether partisan or not, that provide information that helps or hurts, a political party, when it's good for the Democrats, it's those whistleblowers are protected and held up on high. But now when it comes to Joe Ziegler and I, we're being destroyed. The Office of Special Counsel in charge of deciding whether there was retaliation, President Biden put a law partner from Boyce Schiller, a former partner of Hunter Biden, in charge of that agency. How is Hunter, a former partner in a law firm with Hunter Biden, is in charge of the Office of Special Counsel? And he's recused himself, in terms of this, because he knows the conflict that exists. But in a bureaucracy, that recusal is not worth the paper it's written on.
Right. No one's recusing themselves in that situation. So were you in D.C. when you came out and said this is what you'd seen?
What do you mean, like my post of duty? I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Was that where you were located?
Yeah. So I'm the supervisor of an international tax group in my agency all across the country, but I am in the D.C. field office and located in the D.C. suburbs, yes.
And you still are there? They haven't moved you out of there, or they did?
Well, no, I'm still here, but they're trying to, limit promotion potential so that they can tenure me out and I get to resign or have to step down and be demoted. So it's really difficult to swallow. They know what they're doing. They're just smothering me. They're smothering Joe Ziegler. And I just hope that this, within, maybe I can help the new administration with this bureaucracy within IRS or Treasury, with FBI and DOJ and the Senate Department of Justice Tax Division for 5 years, sitting there with all these clients. I know how it works. I know where the fault lines are.
Do you think that some of this is built up over years of creating new government and almost hidden within those layers of government, the corruption that goes on? Because I even see this on the state level. You have a governor who comes in and now suddenly we have an extra Department of Ed where all of this money is going through this Department of Ed. And then it's like, the department where that takes the governor to other countries, and she's going out and recruiting new business. And I use air quotes because no new business ever comes. But suddenly the state of Michigan has their own office in Taiwan. And it's like, who is paying for all this, and how does all of this happen? Do you believe that over time creating bigger and bigger government has caused this problem? Because honestly, that's what we see Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy going in and saying, we're going to cut back on these layers of government. And I believe that once you cut back on the layers of government, you're going to expose a lot of dirty stuff that's hidden there. But once it's built up, it's very hard to cut back.
Yeah, a bureaucracy is this living, sentient being, right? And it protects itself just instinctually. And you see all the time when someone will come in with a report that the federal government did something wrong, this agency did something wrong. What's the response? More money, more people, more training, every single time. Every single time. So it bloats that bureaucracy, and there's never a check to that to say, when an agency says, like, someone says you did something wrong here, they just say, yes, we did something wrong. You never hear, okay, we're going to remove this level, or we're going to be more concise in our hiring. I mean, our agency, IRS Criminal Investigation, publicly says that 30% of the people do 70% of the work.
That's crazy. I mean, but I think that's true in most cases, but still, when you look at what does that say about supervision? What does that say about, I believe that these folks, I mean, it's like the Fauci situation where you get a certain amount of funding and you're not going to cut anything because you want to be able to continue to get that funding. You're not going to expose anything because if you expose something, you might not get the funding. I think funding creates a lot of this problem too. I mean, that we had scientists who weren't willing to come out and speak against him because they were afraid that the funding would stop. I think it's similar in these other agencies where it's like, well, if we pare back or if we try to be more efficient, we won't get the funding. So it's easier to make it less efficient, to make more. And then we have this cushion, and that becomes, I believe, the place where these craters and these hidden corners are where corruption occurs.
Yeah, and that's really how people become products of the bureaucracy, right? Because they're coming up through the ranks and they see things like that. They see things like, well, if we don't spend this pot of money, it's going to be gone next year, and then they won't give it back. So we're going to spend it. We're going to spend it. And then when you get in the echo chambers within the senior leadership of these agencies, they're just telling each other how great they are, the title that they have, that they're deserving of. When the reality is that a vast majority of the senior leadership in my agency is not promoted based on performance. It's based on who's willing to be mobile, who fits some demographic, and it's really come to the tipping point to where we spend a vast percentage of our time on administrative, bureaucratic items, and it's very little mission focused. And that's where I tend to want to spend all my time on the mission. I mean, we joke, we say ABC, right? It's anything but cases in our agency. So all these bureaucrats, all these administrative people, all these people, they're always interested in doing all these projects that don't actually end up materially positively affecting our mission. And then there's people like me, I don't want to do any of that stuff, right? Like, I just want to work on the cases and moving the cases forward. And that's what the American people, expect of us. So I'm optimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic of the Department of Government Efficiency, the administration's emphasis on reducing the bureaucracy. And I just hope to be a tool to help it happen, because I've been fighting this bureaucracy from inside for 15 years.
Well, no, obviously now nothing can happen with the Hunter Biden stuff. He's got this cloud of protection over him. He's under the veil. He can't be investigated. If that weren't the case, if Joe Biden hadn't pardoned him, if there was the availability of going in and figuring this out, what should the American public know about Hunter Biden and how dangerous this is of a precedent to set for presidents and their family?
Look, ultimately, if Hunter Biden was sentenced, the judge in those cases would have used the sentencing guidelines, and they would have come up with a acceptable sentence for him. That's not for me to say. But the danger here, and why this is still important, is because of what, the bias and the weaponization of the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the IRS. That's why we need to shift focus and hold these people accountable. Because when you say like, well, how are we going to attack the bureaucracy? That's how you attack it. First, you be transparent. That's what we did, following the laws, bringing it to Congress. It became public. If the information on the Hunter Biden case didn't go to Congress and they didn't vote to release it and it got out into the public, the Department of Justice, they even did try to take these steps. They would have not charged him. They would have gotten rid of it with a 2 misdemeanor plea deal, and the American public would have never seen what happened. I mean, a jury of his peers in Delaware convicted him of the gun violations, yet the President of the United States said in a statement that no reasonable people would agree that this wasn't lawfare. He said that when he knew that the jury of their peers listened to all the evidence and found his son guilty, basically saying that the jurors weren't reasonable or the justice system is not reasonable. Look, when it fits their narrative, they're going to push it. Unfortunately, this administration. So I think that we're optimistic moving forward.
So do you think this has actually shocked the American people after they saw what happened with Donald Trump and all the cases against him and the cases in New York, the cases in Georgia, the cases in DC, and people kept saying, what, this stuff is baloney. This is lawfare. This is going after your political opponent. But then the contrast of Hunter Biden having really done stuff and the Democrats saying, oh, look the other way, Joe Biden comes out and pardons him. But it's not just that Joe Biden comes out and pardons him. I have to say, it's the leftist media who was, oh, Donald Trump's so dangerous, so scary. There's no one above the law. How many times did we hear that statement? There's no one above the law. But now it's swept under the rug. Do you think that the next, because I feel like for so many years now, we as Republicans have felt like anybody who runs is going to have all this baloney made up about them. They're going to have to go through court cases. Do you think this has scared the American people enough to say we won't buy into this? We're not going to be manipulated by this story that you have to prosecute a political opponent you have?
Well, I hope it did. Right? Then the risk and what I'm doing now, what Joe Ziegler is doing now, was all worth it. Right? We needed to shine light on what happened. We needed to add transparency to this bureaucracy. And when you look at the weaponization, right, like it seems clear that it was lawfare. It was a weaponization of DOJ to go after, President Trump and some other Republicans. And, but what we have here, like, can people say, oh, well, that's my opinion one way or the other, right? What you have here is you have the Department of Justice clearly by their own actions initially and then in the middle and then at the end proves that they were trying to cover up the Hunter Biden case. They were trying to not charge him. I mean, there are memos on May 15, 2023 offering a deferred prosecution agreement, which means he wouldn't have been charged at all. And then if you look at the timing in May 2023, I'm coming forward to testify, and all of a sudden David Weiss in Delaware says, oh, we have to have him a 2 misdemeanor plea deal. If that plea deal had gone through, then DOJ would be sitting here right now being like some of the Democrats on the Hill did, where it's just your opinion that he should have been charged. David Weiss is following the facts and the law. Well, David Weiss told Congress he was following the facts and the law. That's why the 2 misdemeanor plea deal. So what happened when that plea deal fell through and now they indict on the gun charge and on the tax? Did the facts or the law change? No, they didn't. The only thing that changed is that transparency was added to this process. So they couldn't hide it anymore. And it is absolutely unequivocal proof that the Department of Justice was weaponized against one political party.
Well, I just want to say thank you, because we wouldn't know most of this had you not stepped forward. And I know how hard that is. I know how hard it is to go into this arena and try to fight. I mean, we've watched it on so many different levels now. We've watched your case. We've watched Donald Trump. We've watched Daniel Penny. We've watched all of these people go after innocents that have done the right thing for the country. So Gary Shapley, thank you so much for doing what you've done and standing up for all of us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the support. Have a great day.
Thanks. And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon podcast. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com or the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time. Have a blessed day.